The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
Lying is basically just acting, and I am a terrific actor.
You are a terrific actor.
It's not a lie if you believe it.
How old are you?
17. You complete me.
If you're just tuning in,
what you just heard was lie after lie after lie,
which are dubious at best.
Falsehoods told to the public, but
Everyone?
everywhere. The question is,
What is
the truth?
Let's find out then, shall we?
All right. Hey, good evening. How you guys doing? Welcome to Terra Nova. I'm John, and we are in part 2 of our series, Truth Be Told. Before we jump in, I wanted to tell you real quick about something I'm super excited about because the month of May, is Life Group Sign-Up Month, and you might have seen these brochures in your program as Scott was telling you about what was going on. And one of our core values as a community, we call it being a participative community, this idea of spiritual growth being profoundly relational, that as we share life together, spiritual growth happens in honest, authentic community. And we just believe that, like circles are better than rows. And summer life groups are coming up. Summer is fun because our life groups typically run a fairly short run coming into summer breaks. And you might be thinking, I don't know, I got vacations. I don't know if I can sign up for anything. Most of them will run 4 times, usually early in the summer. And if you take a look at this, there's just a ton of variety. There are a bunch of outdoor active groups. And then there are groups for all different kinds of life stages, and men's groups and women's groups and young adult and young couples, and there's just so many different groups. So here's what you do. You take a look at this, and you can feel free to read this the entire time I'm talking. Ignore me completely. This is actually better than what I have to say. And so check this out. Find a group, and signing up is super simple. You just write the group number here. You give us a little bit of your information, and you sign up as an individual couple. And then you can drop this entire thing in the offering baskets at the end of the gathering. You can also scan the QR code, and if you have the Terra Nova app, the button is right there on the home screen for signing up for life groups. If you're watching online, it's on our website as well. So jump in. Life groups will begin in just a handful of weeks, and so you want to be a part of that. But as I said, today we are in part 2 of our series, Truth Be Told. And we began this series talking about something that some psychologists refer to as our mental maps of reality, which we defined as the collection of all of our assumptions about reality. Our mental maps are the collection of all of our assumptions, all of our ideas about life and how it works, this complex grid of beliefs and ideas that govern unconsciously, and that's an important word, they govern unconsciously how we navigate through life, how we navigate through relationships and crisis and conflict and success and sexuality and just on and on, money, wealth, possessions, and so forth. We have these ideas that govern how we handle everything. And when those maps correspond to reality, this is how we defined truth last week. Truth is reality, or what corresponds to reality. And when our maps line up with what is true and what's real, just like literal maps, when your map is accurate, we end up where we wanted to be, where we thought we were going. It kind of works. We show up to reality, as we said last week, in a way that's just aligned with reality. Life works, relationships work, our financial health, our emotional health, things work because we're living in alignment with how things work. This is the idea that the Hebrew Scriptures often refers to as wisdom. This is what wisdom is all about. However, when our mental maps are not corresponding to reality, when we believe lies, when we live out of false ideas about who we are, who others are, how life works, I show up to life in a way that's just off. It's just out of sync. It's out of alignment with the way life is. It's M. Scott Peck in his book, Road Less Traveled, said, mental health is the ongoing process of dedication to reality at all costs. Mental health is the ongoing process of dedication to reality, living in the real world in a real way. And at the same time, he defined all pathology as the inability to accept reality. This is rudimentary to who we are. But the problem is this. Our maps are often well beneath the level of our conscious awareness. They are not things that we're conscious of. And last week we talked about these 3 levels of beliefs or 3 levels of our convictions taken from philosopher Michael Novak, who says, well, first of all, there are public convictions. This is what I say I believe, sometimes out of convenience, sometimes out of politeness. Some of these are little white lies. You look marvelous today, dear. Maybe you believe it, maybe you're just saying it, whatever. Like there are things I say I believe, they're politically correct, they're trendy, I want others to think I believe them. Then there are my private convictions, what I really think I believe, but they sometimes turn out to be fickle. When life changes, when the pressure's on, when the circumstances change, it turns out I don't really believe that as much as I thought I did. And then way down beneath the surface often are what he calls my core convictions. This is what I show I believe out of what I do. This is what I actually believe. Like I believe in gravity. Gravity is a part of my mental maps. And so when I drop my phone, I never look up. I always know. It's like, yeah, it fell down every single time. Now, these core convictions we said last week, this is what our mental maps are. These are our mental maps, but they're often hidden from us. And in fact, our core convictions might actually fly in the face of our public convictions. There are things that we say we believe, but how we live belies the fact that we don't actually. So for example, I might say, hey, I believe people are basically trustworthy. I mean, that's a nice thing to say, right? That's a trendy, acceptable thing to believe. I believe people are basically trustworthy, but I never loan out my tools. I never loan out my books. I don't give or loan people money. I don't let my guard down in groups. And in fact, I often treat those even closest to me with a level of paranoia and suspicion, such that in a conflict, when they say, well, that's not really what I meant, I don't believe them. I think they're lying, that they really did mean. There is something else going on inside me, right? I am revealing through my emotions and my unguarded behaviors a mental map that says something like, don't trust people. Don't trust them. They will let you down. They will turn on you. They will leave you. They will use things against you. And I may never say that out loud. And I might not even think I believe that, but somewhere in my story, those beliefs became a part of my mental maps. And now I navigate through life with those scripts. Now, here's why this is such a big deal. Our beliefs determine what we see. And what we see determines what we do, and what we do determines eventually who we become. Our beliefs determine what we see, which determines what we do, which eventually determines who we become. Our beliefs determine what we see. And there are so many studies on this. We do not see the world as it actually is. We think we do not. We see the world as we think it is, as we expect it to be, as we are predisposed to or inclined to see it. We all have cognitive biases that shape what we actually see in the world, and how we see determines how we act and react in the world, which will eventually determine the kind of person that I become. And Jesus lived with a mental map. He lived with ideas that about the way things are that were perfectly aligned with the reality of God, the presence of God, the goodness of God, the will of God. There was like absolute alignment between what Jesus said he believed, what he thought he believed, and how he actually lived. Jesus said his Father was always present, that he loved him, he was with him, that he was attentive and active and working in this world. And Jesus said that was true. He thought that was true. And man, he just lived out of that mental map. Jesus believed his Father loved him and was with him and for him, like I believe in gravity. It was his life. There's a great story that illustrates this. I love the story so much that I tell it a lot because it's a fun story. It takes place in the middle of the night. He and Jesus and his followers and friends are out on the Lake of Galilee. It's a big lake, and a flash storm has come in such that these men who grew up on this lake believe they are about to die. And so they wake Jesus up. That's a fun side part of the story. He's asleep in the boat. They wake him up, and Jesus, when he wakes up, and one of the reasons why I love this story is we get to see this unguarded moment. Like what you are like when somebody wakes you up, right? This unguarded moment. And Jesus reacts to his friends and followers like you would react to a friend who dropped their phone and looked up to the sky to find it. You would be like, what are you doing? I dropped my phone. I know, but what? And Jesus looks at his followers and he says, why are you afraid? I don't get it. Why are you panicking right now? Can you imagine having a mental map like Jesus's mental map? And when Jesus says things like, then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free, famous Jesus quote there, this is the kind of thing that Jesus is getting after, these mental maps, these core convictions. Now, as we saw last week, that famous line actually started a debate in the temple in Jerusalem with some very powerful, very wealthy, influential religious leaders who had actually decided they were going to kill him. And it's the debate about character and the roots of character and freedom and death as polar realities and truth and lies as creating those polar realities. And the debate ends with Jesus telling this group of religious people, not atheists, mind you, religious leaders, that their father was the deceiver, capital D deceiver himself, the diabolos, the devil. And Jesus calls him the father of lies, the ultimate deceiver, the ultimate liar. Now, at that point, many of us modern Westerners, maybe even those of us who are inclined to say we believe certain things, in reality, we kind of check out a little bit. Like we want to mythologize this idea of like there's like other spiritual realities and there are things, and you're saying these are real. It's not just a metaphor. But Western secular reductionist theories that try to always explain evil away, and as perhaps like a lack of education or a socioeconomic or a political problem or a hangover from evolutionary psychology, for many of us, those explanations just fall flat. They just seem to fall short of our actual human experience, the pervasiveness and the persistence of evil. And it's the persistence of it that sometimes gets to me. Like, even when I want something that I know is unhealthy out of me, it's still in it. Like, there is a persistence and a pervasiveness to evil, not just around us, but inside of us. And it's like, there are many of us who look at the reality of evil and just think, there is something more. There is something more than can be just explained through merely material or social terms. There's something else. And last week we said that according to Jesus, there is a dark and malevolent force or forces in this world who are hell-bent on destruction and death, tearing it all down. And their primary means, their primary stratagem, if you will, is deception. Deception, lies, the things that we believe and come to believe about ourselves, about the people around us and others, about life, about God, the things that we come to believe that aren't actually true, aren't actually real. Jesus says when he lies, he speaks his native language because he is a liar and the father of lies. And Jesus, speaking to religious leaders in Jerusalem, he's tying their efforts to try to kill him to the fact that they are living a lie, that they are living in deception, locked in it. And Jesus ties that to an ancient story, really the original story of deception and death, told again and again and again throughout history to explain what's wrong with us and what's wrong with the world. It's the story, a rather famous story, of Adam and Eve. The story of Adam, whose name actually is not a name, it's a Hebrew word that simply means human, and Eve, which is also a Hebrew word which means life. In other words, this is the story about how human and life got to be the way that they are. Now, these ancient Hebrew origin stories, if you will, found in the document that we call Genesis, this is the place where a lot of people understandably just kind of check out from reading the Bible because this is ancient literature, comes from a completely different culture. And like for a modern Westerner, we read it, it's like weird, it's anti-science. I mean, there's a talking snake on page 3. I'm out. Like I can't go any further. I can't really track with what's going on. But listen, this is important. If you're that kind of in that mindset, I totally get it. I really do understand. But understand this. People in the ancient world knew that snakes didn't talk. I mean, you don't need a degree in biology or zoology to figure that out. They knew snakes don't talk. That's actually part of the point of the story, that there's something more. going on with this character, this figure of the snake. There's something else happening here. And maybe you read these old ancient origin stories. Maybe for you, you read them as literal history, or maybe you read them more as metaphor or parable, or maybe even like ancient, even inspired mythology, a polemical counter story to the origin stories of the cultures all around them. There are a lot of different ways that people read these stories. Those are interesting conversations about the genre of literature, the kind of literature it is. But either way, however you take these stories, I want to suggest to you that it's true. That it's true. And in fact, in the words of Jordan Peterson, truer. These are like some of the truest stories ever told, profoundly and deeply true, truer than they frankly would be if they were merely historical, journalistic accounts of something that happened. This is a story that has resonated for millennia as a deep and thoughtful expose or analysis of the human condition, of all of us, of human and life, and how it got to be this way. The story begins in a place called Delight, which is what the word Eden means. It's this garden oasis in the middle of a wilderness, thriving with life, where Adam, who was made by God in his own image, is placed to work it and to rule over it. And this garden oasis is just filled with trees. The Lord God made all kinds of trees to grow up out of the ground, trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food, beautiful, delicious. And then in the middle of the garden are two special trees. One of them represents God's own life and the gift of God's life. Now, trees as symbols of life were very common in the ancient world, even sometimes worshiped as symbols of gods, of the god of fertility or so forth. But this tree in this garden very clearly is not a god, it's a gift. It's the gift from God, the gift of life. It's like, this is yours. I did this for you. And then, apparently, next to this tree is another tree, and it is a tree of autonomy. Is a tree of seizing for myself the right to define what is good and evil, bad and right for me, myself, the tree of knowing that for me. And the first tree is part of an open invitation from God to eat all of the trees. Eat from any of the trees you may freely eat. But the second is the one and only thing in God's whole good world that's actually forbidden. He says, don't eat that tree. Don't eat from that tree, it will kill you. In other words, in a world of 10,000 yeses, there's one single solitary no. Now, these two trees, like, why is this part of the story in there? It's a powerful image, I think, of the human experience. Because isn't it true? Like, every good thing in my life is matched with equal or greater opportunities to blow it up. Isn't that true? Like, every good thing in my life, every good gift in my life, my health, my family, my influence, my job, my community, every good thing in my life that I treasure and value is matched with an equal and even greater opportunities to completely ruin the whole thing. And so these trees are like connected or related to each other, and apparently they're near each other, maybe even right next to each other. In other words, to experience or eat from this tree of life, to experience God's life, I must walk past this tree of seizing for myself the right to define what is good and evil and choose not to take from it, to resist it, because, man, it looks good. It's like the epitome of the low-hanging fruit. I mean, it's just right there. But God says that will kill me. And I'm going to let him define what is good and evil, what is right and wrong for me. So I'm going to avoid that tree so that I can continue to enjoy the life that God has for me. And that whole scene ends with this beautiful, like, utopic expression or description of innocence and authenticity and like real wide open community. It ends with this simple but wonderful line: Adam and his wife were both naked and felt no shame. Enter the talking snake. Now, the serpent Serpents were very common spiritual symbols throughout the ancient world, from Egypt to Samaria and beyond. Very common spiritual symbols in the ancient world of death and the underworld on the one hand, but also of wisdom. And here in the story, both of those are kind of alluded to. And as the story unfolds, though, it's clearly intended, this serpent is clearly intended to be a personification of something more than a snake, a personification of the one that Jesus referred to as the diabolos, or the devil. Now, the serpent was more crafty, more shrewd. It's like that word could be translated like sly, like tricky, like slippery. The serpent was more crafty than any of the other creatures. And he comes to Eve when she is alone, enjoying her new life in Eden, and he just drops a question. Did God really say, you must not eat from any tree in the garden? Like, really? Did God really say that to you guys? Like, it's a complete reversal of what God actually said, but it's just a question. It's just a question. It's not exactly a brazen lie. It's just a question, which is what makes it so incredibly deceitful, because the question has already begun to subtly reframe in the conversation her relationship with God and God's goodness and generosity and trustworthiness. Did God really say that to you guys? The woman is quick to correct him, like, no, you got that wrong. No, we can eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say, you must not eat from the tree that's in the middle of the garden. But then she adds a little something to it. In fact, you must not even touch it, or you will die. And isn't it interesting how often religion takes a healthy boundary just a little bit further, just adds a little something to it? Well, the table has been set, and the serpent replies, you will not certainly die. No, you will not certainly die, for God knows. God knows, see, that when you eat from that tree, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. And notice that he comes at her, this is so important, not with a club or a sword or like laser beam eyes, like coming at her with some kind of weapon. He comes at her with what? An idea. He comes at her with an idea, an illusion of reality, partial truths, disinformation, questions, just confusing the issue just a little bit. It is masterful deception. In fact, take notes if you want to up your con game. The best lies are not bald-faced lies. They are not brazen lies. No. You want to twist somebody around in circles. You say something that's like 95% true, and then you just make sure the 5% is the one that gets them all twisted and messed up. Or more than that, you say something that is true, but it's just not the whole truth. It's like half of the truth, and then you conveniently leave out the contrasting the other side of the equation, which sounds pretty much like every political conversation that happens in the recent years, right? And then you make sure that whatever it is plays into what someone really wants, what they want to think, what they want to hear, what they want to have. And he comes at Eve with a deceptive and incredibly destructive idea. You can't really trust God. You know that, don't you? I mean, come on, you're not a fool. You can't really trust that he knows you and really has your best interests in heart. No, he is holding out on you. He is trying to control you. He is ridiculously restrictive. No, you take control of your own life. You need to take control of your own life, and you will be happier and your life will be better. And notice how these half-truths and this smoke and mirror thing plays into her wants. So the woman saw the fruit of the tree was good for food. It's pleasing in the eye. This isn't poisonous. This isn't bad for me. Why would he say this is bad for me? Pleasing in the eye and desirable for gaining wisdom, for making her life better. She is going to level up. And who doesn't want to level up, right? I mean, who doesn't want some good food, some beauty, and some social status? And seeing that this would do this for her, she took some of it and she ate it. And then she gave some to her husband, and he ate it. And then the eyes of both of them were opened, just as the serpent had said. But this is not the wonderful, like God kind of experience that she thought it was going to be. This is no beautiful gift. Instead, as their eyes are opened, what they see, what they realize, is that they're naked. And they immediately make a mad dash to try to cover this up. And immediately in the story, things begin to die. Things begin to die. Their innocence is replaced with shame and guilt. Their authenticity and their vulnerability of their relationship is replaced by hiding and blame shifting. And though they do not immediately die, he was right about that, they will. In fact, sin always kills. Sin, and one of the ways we define sin around here all the time is everything that's messed up with me and everything that's messed up the world. It's like everything that's dysfunctional or jacked up about me and everything that's messed up and dysfunctional and jacked up in this world. That's what the word sin refers to. And it always leads to death. It always kills. It kills our relationships. It kills our self-esteem. It kills our innocence. It kills our influence. It kills our potential, our dreams, our marriages, our businesses, our families, our jobs, our futures, our finances, our nobility, our glory. Sin always kills. It always, always, always leads to something dying. Now, we are going to pick that story up right there next week. But here, in this very simply told but deep and profoundly true story about human and life is the lie behind all lies. The lie behind all lies: you cannot trust God. You cannot really, if there is even a God, you cannot trust. He does not truly know you. He does not love you. He does not care. He is not for you. You are alone in this world. If it is to be, it is up to me. No. You trust yourself. You trust you. You trust yourself. You define what is good and evil. You follow the voice in your heart. You are the best indicator of what is best for you. That is your true guide. You do you. You trust you, and you believe in you. Sound familiar? Pretty much like every commercial on TV in recent years. That is not new. That is millennia old. And here in this ancient story, we see fog and confusion and disparate information and deception shown into what are sometimes called the three great questions of life. The three great questions of life, namely, who is God? Or the gods, or is there a God or gods? Who are we? What does it really mean to be human? Who am I? And what is a good life? What does it look like to live life well? How does life flourish? Historically, like the three great questions of philosophy and literature and ethics and theology and art, and to a significant degree, each one of these questions, how you answer them builds on how you might answer the question before, right? So your understanding of what it looks like to live a good life, what is a life well lived, how does human life flourish? Well, that's going to depend to some degree on how you answer this question. What does it mean to be human? Who am I? Who are we? And how I answer that question, well, that begins with how I answer this first one. Who is God? Is there a God or gods? What is that being like? What do I think of when I think of God? Which is why old school theologian A.W. Tozer had it so right when he said this: what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. What comes to our minds when we think about God really is like the most important thing about us. So let's do an illustration or an exercise through this. Let's imagine, for example, that you believed what Jesus believed about his heavenly Father. Like you had a mental map that actually looked like his mental map, and foundational to your core convictions was this idea here that an infinitely wise and capable and creative being has created all that we can see and all that we can't see, including the natural systems and processes of creation, and gave life to all living things. And that being, imagine that being, capable of that, knows you. You. Knows who you are, loves you. Really loves you, knows the best possible story for your life. Are you kidding me? And wants you to live in this moment by moment connection and willingness and gratitude with him, like this thriving, healthy, constant relationship. Can you even imagine actually believing such a thing, like wrapping your head and your life around that? Can you imagine living consistently with that map like you do with gravity itself? Can you imagine that? To which some of us might say, well, hold on, John, that's exactly what I believe. That is what I believe. But then if we were to be honest, ruthlessly honest with ourselves, every day, throughout the day, we act and feel as if we don't. Come on, seriously. Worry? Have you ever done that? Fear, panic, anxiety, envy, inferiority, loneliness, shame, superiority, jealousy, greed, on and on the list could go, all completely inconsistent with a belief like this. Isn't that true? These are all things that would make Jesus look at me just kind of cockeyed and go, what are you doing right now, John? Why are you afraid? Why are you greedy right now? Holding on to some petty little thing on this tiny little planet as if you do not have an infinitely wise and creative, powerful Heavenly Father whose hands are wide open to you. What are you doing right now? Why aren't you generous? Can you imagine living as if you really believed this to be true? Can you imagine how that might play out in your life? What comes to our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. Now, of course, there are dozens and dozens of other ideas about God that are competing in our core convictions with an idea like that. In fact, in 2006, the sociologist I've quoted a number of times named Rodney Stark and a team at Baylor University did a nationwide survey on religion, and part of it was how people viewed God. And they came up with this grid, and in their estimate, and this is kind of how they pieced the data together, 31% believed in what they ended up calling an authoritarian God. There were beliefs that like there is a God, he knows me, he's all about me, and he is not happy with me. He loves rules, he's got a lot of rules, I never meet them. He's generally controlling and angry and someone to be afraid of. 25% believed in what they ended up calling a benevolent God, that God does love us. 23% believed in what they termed a distant God. He's just like completely removed. Nothing at all to do with me or what's going on. And then another 16% believed in a critical God. 5% claimed not to believe in God at all. And here's the thing, here's why I throw this out, because maybe in your core convictions, and definitely in my core convictions, for some, like maybe even all of these ideas are competing with our idea of God. And so it's like, yeah, maybe there's this infinitely wise, creative being that made all we see. Okay. But that being is angry. That being is an angry, authoritative rule maker who loves his rules more than he loves me. He loves his rules more than he loves you, and you will never live up to his expectation. He is like always disappointed with you, often angry. Your sin just piles up, and it always keeps you separate from him. He can't even look at you. That's in there somewhere, maybe. Or maybe there's another idea that floats around a lot. There is a being like that, like a greater power, like there's something, but that being just wants me to be happy. It's like a nice old aunt or like a doting grandfather. It's like, I just want you to be happy, dear. That's all I want for you. I just want you to be happy. And since, hey, I'm the best determiner of what will make me happy, and since this God is pretty hands-off and laissez-faire, well, then I follow my heart. That's how I go through life. That's what I believe. Or maybe it's this other one, that there is a being, maybe a power greater than us, but that being is distant and far removed and unconcerned about your actual life. Just look around. Look around at all that happens in this world. If there is a God, he surely is not rolling up his sleeves to help you anytime soon. You are on your own. If it is to be, it is up to me. So pray all you want, but you better get to work. Because if it is to be, it's up to you. And we just go on and on. Like we can list these like distortions that work their way into our maps all night long. Who is God? There is no God. Who is God? We could never know. It is an unknowable answer. Who is God? We are. You are. We are all the gods and goddesses of our own lives. On and on the answers could go. But here's the thing. What comes to our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about how we will answer the other questions. Turns out, I think A.W. Tozer was actually right. There are a few books that have come out lately from the field of neuroscience. It's a field I find fascinating. I'm often struggling to figure out what they're saying. But there are a number of books that have come out on the physical, tangible effects of a person's view of God on their actual brains. And one book in particular came out a few years ago that really just kind of landed like a bomb in the world by a pair of authors, Andrew Newberg and Mark Robert Waldman. And they write in this book, here's what their research tells us. If you contemplate God long enough, if you meditate on God long enough, something surprising happens in the brain. Neural functioning, your brain actually begins to change. Different circuits become activated while others become deactivated. And then they unpack that a little bit. There's this little part of our brain called the anterior cingulate cortex. It's sometimes called the ACC. It's situated in between what's called your limbic brain and your frontal lobe, which is the limbic brain is like your emotional brain, your reactive brain. Your frontal lobe is, of course, where like rational thought takes place. And it acts as a mediator between our thoughts and our feelings. And here's what they discovered. When stimulated by contemplative practices, when that part of the brain is stimulated by meditation or prayer or worship or singing or reflection, two very specific and measurable things actually happen in your brain. Number one, there is what is called a down regulation of your brain's limbic system, especially your amygdala and your hypothalamus that are responsible for the brain's alarm system. This is like the fight or fright. There's a deactivation, there's a down regulation, a reduction of impulses of anger and anxiety and fear. In other words, doing this actually calms your brain down while at the same time, and this was maybe the most remarkable finding of all of their science, it actually increases not just the function, but the actual size, the mass of that cingulate cortex where we experience love and empathy and compassion and sympathy. And when we meditate, and here's what they discovered, because they did lots of different double-blind studies and such, especially on God's love. When we meditate on God's love, it stimulates that part of the brain and actually increases our capacity, actually increases the neurological circuitry for empathy, compassion, and generosity. Simply put, as we think on God's goodness, as we think on God's goodness, that He loves, that He is love, and that He loves us, it literally changes our brains. It makes us more inclined to be loving people ourselves. And get this, that was true even for people who didn't believe it. That was true even for people who weren't sure what they believed about God to begin with, meditating on God being loving towards them. Your brain, it turns out, is like hardwired to relate to God in love. It thrives on that, but that's not the end of the story. Turns out the opposite is also true. If your view of God is angry, or fearful, or this punishing, punitive, shaming God, or like this controlling tyrant, this rules-loving God whose disposition towards you is always one of disappointment and frustration, turns out that actually changes your brain as well. It damages it. It actually damages your brain, and Newberg writes, it has a similar effect on your brain to PTSD. That meditating on an angry, vindictive, or punishing God has a similar effect on your brain to PTSD and changes your brain to make you more fearful, more aggressive, and less empathetic to people who are suffering. What comes to your mind when you think about God just might be the most important thing about us. Is that true? Is that true? And if so, no wonder that the oldest lie, like the lie behind all lies, is a lie about how we think about God. That's where it all begins. Masterful deception, a complete distortion of who God is in the story as you're reading the story of this open-handedly generous, loving, knowable, personal, benevolent, trustworthy being into a God who seems petty and controlling and restrictive and untrustworthy. Now, we're going to pick it up right there next week about the lies that we believe about what it means to be human, lies that we believe about ourselves. Do not miss next week. But here's where I want to end us today with a simple question. What do you believe about God? And then add this next word, really. What do you believe about God? Really, not what you say you believe, not even what you think you believe, but what you truly believe, like what my emotions and my unguarded behaviors, my reactions and fears to others show that I truly believe. And maybe you, like me, find yourself being pulled between conflicting views or ideas about God. Is my view of God transforming me into a more loving and healthier and less anxious person? Hello. So today, I want to leave us with a little bit of homework. Taken from all of these studies about how your view of God affects your brain and your life, a contemplative exercise. I want to give you a contemplative exercise, a meditation exercise on this statement that I gave you a little while ago. In fact, I would like us to read this statement out loud. Will you do that with me? Even if you don't believe it's true, let's say this out loud. An infinitely wise, capable, creative being created all that we can see and all that we can't, and gave life to all living things. That being knows who I am, loves me, knows the best possible story for my life, and wants me to live in moment by moment connection, willingness, and gratitude with him. Now, here's my challenge. Here's the homework for the week, if you will. Even if you're not sure you believe this, even if you're not sure what you believe about God, or you don't believe a couple parts of this, like your mind pushes back, like, well, that's not necessarily the whole story. This week, just meditate on it. Just meditate on it, on and off throughout the day. Think about God thinking about you and loving you. Throughout the day, throughout the week, think about God thinking of you and loving you as you are. As you are in that moment, maybe in a moment like you just really blew it, like you lost it and it was so bad and you lost your cool, or you said things, or you did something, and as shame begins to kick in, think of God thinking of you and loving you in that moment as you are. Or maybe you just did something really boneheaded. I mean, it was the dumbest mistake. And right when you're about to, you're like, I am so stupid. I am such an idiot. In that moment, think of God thinking of you and loving you. As you are, as dumb as you are, just love nothing but it. Effortfully throughout the week, bringing this into our mental maps through repetitive thought, which is how that works in the brain, through repetitive thought, effortfully bringing that into our mental maps. Meditate on this week, on this idea throughout the week. Meditate on you for yourself, and then, bonus round, extend this to other people you bump into. Think of God thinking of them and loving them as well. And then join us again next week for part 3 of Truth Be Told. Let me close this in prayer. Heavenly Father, I want to thank you that you have revealed yourself so clearly as our Father who is in the heavens, that you are the God that Jesus spoke of and related to, that you are incredibly capable, massively brilliant and wise, that you know us, everything about us intimately. You love us. You are for us. And you desire for us to live in moment by moment connection, willingness, and gratitude. That's just mind-blowing. It's hard for us to wrap our heads around. So I pray for all of us this week, especially me, that as we head through this week, your grace and your Spirit would help us bring this idea down in deep so that it becomes part of our mental maps. And I pray that in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, hey, before you take off, just a couple of things. Listen, if you got anything out of what we're talking about today, share this with a friend. If you're watching online, you can share it very easily, or you can pass this on to somebody. Invite them back with you next week. On your way out, please stop by the Kids Feeding Kids table. Sign up for where you're going to serve, and you can give at that table as well. And you can scan this card, as Scott was telling you. You can scan that, and you can give there as well, as we're raising about $19,000 because we're purchasing and packaging 75,000 meals for these children in an orphanage in Zambia. So this is our last week to do this. Friday it begins. It's going to be a lot of fun. Can't wait to see a bunch of you there. While you're doing that, don't forget to fill out your Connect card and drop that in the offering basket on your way out. And don't forget that for every single one of these, we're going to be donating $5 to this ministry called One Step Ministry that works with single parent families in our community, especially those who are on the brink of homelessness. And so while we're serving children around the world, we want to serve and love on some kids right in our own backyard. You can be a part of that with us. You can also drop your offering envelope in that basket on your way out. You can also give, of course, online and on the app. And don't forget this Life Fruit brochure. You can drop this entire brochure in the basket as well, or you can take it home, spend a little more time with it, and sign up online during the week. That's about it. God bless you guys. Hope you have a fantastic rest of your evening, and we will see you back next week for part 3 of our series, Truth Be Told. Have a great evening. Thanks for being here.